The planet was called Varnok, a dusty, wind-scoured rock orbiting a bloated red star. Its surface was littered with the twisted remains of battles past scorched hulls, shattered drones, and the occasional fossilized boot. It had changed hands 17 times in the last decade, and yet, for all its strategic value, no one really wanted to live there. The atmosphere was breathable barely, but the gusts of iron-rich wind made sure no one breathed comfortably. On the ridge overlooking the battlefield, Commander Tarx of the Tarx Coalition stood silently, his 6 glossy black eyes narrowed toward the valley below. His species didn't blink. He didn't need to. What he saw down there demanded absolute, uninterrupted observation. A human was walking into battle, unarmed. The Tarx forces had been fighting the Dreln Empire here for 6 months. The Dreln were relentless, methodical, and impressively well supplied. The Tarx had the advantage in numbers and drone artillery, but the Dreln had terrain familiarity and air superiority. Every day was a brutal stalemate of attrition, until today. The human's name was Zachary West. He wasn't part of the Tarx military. In fact, he wasn't part of any military anymore. Former Marine, discharged 3 years ago after a roadside bomb in Jakarta shattered both femurs and cracked a vertebra. He'd walked again, sure, but no one expected him to run, let alone fight. And yet here he was, walking down a slope of loose gravel with a slight limp, wearing only desert fatigues and a grimy undershirt. No weapon, no armor, just a small pouch at his hip and a strip of duct tape wrapped around his left boot, holding the sole in place. "Why is he not armed?" Tarx asked, breaking his silence. Lieutenant Coron, a lanky Tarx with a nervous tick in his upper neck, glanced at his datapad. "Commander, he refused weapons, said he didn't need any. And you allowed this. He's not under our command." He volunteered through the Interspecies Liaison Office. Technically, he's a civilian observer. Tarx let out a sound that might have been a sigh, and yet he walks into the deadliest active combat zone on this hemisphere. Coron nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, Commander." Below them, the Dreln artillery opened up again, thundering across the valley. Chunks of red rock exploded into the air, dust clouds erupted. Zachary kept walking. He ducked once casually as a missile screamed overhead and detonated 100 meters behind him. He didn't run. Didn't even flinch. Tarx turned away in frustration. "Get the drones ready. If he dies in the next 2 minutes, I want our retaliation to be so overwhelming the Dreln forget their own names." "Yes, Commander," but Zachary didn't die. He reached the midpoint of the valley. Dreln soldiers spotted him, at least 6. Their plasma rifles snapped to aim. Tarx tensed, then something unexpected happened. The Dreln didn't fire, they hesitated, exchanged glances, and began calling something into their comms. Tarx patched in. "Not armed. Repeat, target is unarmed. No heat signature of concealed weapons. Orders, do we engage?" There was a pause. Then another voice, "Capture for interrogation." Zachary raised both hands slowly as if surrendering. The Dreln approached cautiously. One of them, a stocky female with a scar across her neck, motioned for him to kneel. He did. Then he exploded into motion. The first Dreln went down with a sharp elbow to the throat. The second had his weapon ripped away and used as a bludgeon. The third managed to fire a shot, but it went wide as Zachary shoved the body of the first into the line of fire. In under 10 seconds, all 6 were unconscious or groaning in the dirt. Tarx's mouth opened slightly. Coron stared, eyes wide. Did he just win a close-quarters fight with 6 Dreln soldiers without a weapon? Tarx didn't respond. Zachary picked up one of the Dreln rifles, slung it over his back, and continued walking now toward the Dreln command outpost nestled into the ravine wall. "Commander," Coron said, "should we inform him that's a heavily fortified position with autocannons and at least 30 soldiers?" "No," Tarx said. "Let's see what happens." 30 minutes later, the Dreln outpost exploded, not from a missile strike, from the inside. Tarx recon drones showed footage of Zachary slipping in through a side maintenance hatch, crawling through ductwork, and disabling the power grid before chaos erupted. Emergency lights flickered. Then came the sound of screams, gunfire, and somehow a fire in the armory. When the dust settled, Zachary limped out of the smoke, dragging a half-conscious Dreln officer by the collar. His left arm hung awkwardly. Back at the Tarx command post, medics rushed to meet him. Atres walked out to greet him personally. "You are injured," Atres said. Zachary nodded, sweat streaking down his dirt-smeared face. "Yeah, dislocated shoulder, maybe a few cracked ribs. You require medical attention. I'll live. You destroyed an enemy command position alone." "Why?" Zachary squinted up at him. "Because someone had to. You guys were stuck playing trench games for 6 months. I figured I'd try something different." "That was suicide." "Not if it worked." Later, in the medical tent, a Tarx physician who had never treated a human before struggled to understand the limits of human endurance. Zachary's shoulder had to be popped back into place. The process made him scream so loudly that 2 Tarx guards outside instinctively drew their weapons. The physician, baffled, scanned the human's torso. 2 fractured ribs, bruising along the upper lung. "You should not have been able to carry another being," Zachary exhaled slowly. "I didn't have a choice." He remained under observation for a week. During that time, rumors spread across both armies. The humans had sent a weapon disguised as a man. The Dreln began referring to him as the Ghost. Tarx soldiers started requesting human consultants for their raids, but what disturbed Atres the most wasn't the violence. It was the aftermath. Zachary never bragged. Never explained how he'd known where the Dreln power conduits ran, or how he'd memorized Dreln squad movement patterns. He simply sat quietly, drank water, and winced every time he shifted his shoulder. Atres visited him on the 8th day. "You are healing slowly. I'm not a machine. You could have died." "I almost did." "Why risk it?" Zachary looked up, eyes tired. "Because I've seen what happens when people wait around hoping someone else will act." Atres tilted his head. "This is not strategy." "It is madness." Zachary chuckled, then winced. "Maybe, but it worked." 2 weeks later, Dreln forces evacuated the region. The loss of their command node had crippled their coordination. The Tarx reclaimed the valley. Casualties dropped by 60%. Council records would later mark the event as a turning point. But even decades later, no explanation satisfied the Tarx historians or the Dreln analysts. No one could fully explain how an unarmed human, walking into battle alone, had changed the course of a war. Atres, now retired, kept a single photo on the wall of his modest home, a grainy still from drone footage showing Zachary West walking calmly down a hill, a plume of smoke rising behind him and no weapon in sight. He often stared at it silently, trying to understand. He never could. 3 days after the Dreln withdrawal, Zachary sat on a folding stool outside the Tarx Field infirmary, arm in a sling, bare foot propped on a crate. A medic had insisted on removing the taped boot and found 3 blisters, a mild infection, and a shard of embedded glass. Zachary had muttered something about a bar fight in Nairobi and insisted it wasn't the worst thing he'd stepped on. A pale orange sky stretched overhead with faint lightning flickers near the horizon. Varnok's magnetic storms were rolling in again. Commander Atres approached, his gait slower than usual. Instead of his formal armor, he wore a field robe cinched at the waist. Zachary squinted up at him, shielding his eyes with his free hand. "You're not delivering bad news, are you?" Zachary asked. "No." "All the bad news has already occurred." "Good. Then maybe you brought coffee." "I do not consume boiling plant oils." "Well, that's your loss." Atres remained standing. The Dreln sent a message. "They've requested a truce review at the neutral dome in Sector 12. I'm guessing they didn't mention me." "They did. They asked if the human weapon would be present." Zachary made a face. "That's not a title I want." Nonetheless, your presence is requested. I'm not a diplomat, neither am I, but here we are. Zachary lowered his foot from the crate with a grunt. If this is some kind of ceremonial thing, I'm not wearing a robe. There are no robes, just questions. Great. I love being studied like a bug. The neutral dome, an inflated polymer structure ringed with decontamination arches and shielded from high-altitude scanners, was a 2-hour transport ride from the front line. Zachary sat alone in the rear cabin of the hover skiff, legs stretched out, arms still strapped to his chest. His breath fogged the window occasionally. He didn't bother wiping it. The Tarx driver didn't speak once. When they arrived, the Dreln delegation was already waiting. 5 of them, all standing in a semicircle under the dome's central lighting grid. They wore dark environmental suits with subtle clan markings across their shoulders. Their leader, taller than the others with a deep red iris and a prosthetic lower jaw, stepped forward. "You are the human," the Dreln said. Zachary nodded once. "That's me. You infiltrated our command node without support." "I did. You disabled our surveillance grid." "Also true. You rendered unconscious or incapacitated 32 of our soldiers using improvised methods." "Depends on how you define improvised, but yeah." The Dreln leader's jaw clicked softly. "Explain your motive." "I wanted the shooting to stop. You could have been killed. The probabilities were overwhelming. I've been on the wrong end of odds before." For several seconds, no one spoke. The Dreln scanned him with a handheld device, blinking as data scrolled across their viewing lenses. One of the younger ones whispered something, but the leader didn't respond. "You fractured your own shoulder during the incursion." Slipped on a coolant pipe. "Not my best moment." You continued fighting afterward. "There wasn't time to stop and complain." The Dreln leader stepped closer, tilting his head slightly. "What are your species' combat limits?" Zachary exhaled through his nose. "You're asking the wrong question." "What is the right question?" "Why I kept going." The leader hesitated. "Why did you?" "I didn't want to lose anyone else. That's it. It wasn't about tactics or glory. It was about stopping more body bags from piling up. You risked your life for a probability." "No, for a chance." That night, back at the Tarx base, HRES reviewed the transcript twice. The Dreln had agreed to a demilitarized corridor along the ravine. For the first time in months, drones showed no heat signatures in the high cliffs. No movement. Just dust and silence. Inside the infirmary, Zachary lay on a cot, eyes closed, while a Tarx medic carefully re-splinted his fingers. The bones had been strained during the fight, one knuckle slightly out of socket. "Hold still," the medic said. "You have damage to the ligaments." "Will I ever play piano again?" The medic blinked. "I do not know what that is." "Then I'll assume yes, you should be resting." "I'm horizontal." "That's close enough." The medic adjusted the sling. "You should not have been capable of carrying that Dreln. Their atmospheric gear alone weighs over 30 kilograms. Adrenaline's a hell of a thing." "Is that a drug?" "Sort of. It's a chemical the body makes when it thinks you're about to die." The medic paused. "Your biology creates combat enhancers automatically?" "Yeah, it's not always helpful. Sometimes it just makes you shake a lot." The next morning, Zachary limped into the briefing tent with a mug of something the Tarx called thermal broth. It tasted like peppered seawater. HRES was already there, reviewing a projection of the ravine, now overlaid with green demarcation lines. "We've received confirmation," HRES said without turning. "The ceasefire is holding. Good. You've caused confusion among both factions. Can't say I'm surprised. They have started asking if all humans are capable of similar feats." "What did you tell them?" "That I don't know." Zachary leaned against the tent pole. "That's fair." HRES finally turned. "You do not act like a soldier. I stopped being 1 year ago, but you retain the instincts." Zachary took a sip of the broth and winced. "They don't go away. I am curious." "About? What would you have done if you failed?" Zachary looked out past the tent flap toward the horizon where the storm clouds were stacking like bruises. "Probably died." But I wasn't planning on failing. You had no reinforcements, didn't need them, no extraction plan. I don't tend to make those. Then you were improvising. No, Zachary said, I was adapting. The next week passed quietly. The Tarx began rotating their units out of the ravine and into stabilization zones. Dreln scouts were seen only from a distance, never approaching. Zachary spent most of the time in the recovery ward, undergoing stim therapy and muscle reconditioning. The process involved short bursts of microcurrent pulses through his injured leg and shoulder, forcing muscle contractions to maintain tone. It was uncomfortable, sometimes excruciating, but he never asked for sedation. On the 7th day, while electrodes twitched across his thigh, HRES entered with a data slate in hand. There's been a request from the council. Zachary didn't open his eyes. Are they offering me a medal or a lecture? Neither. They want you to train diplomatic liaisons. Zachary laughed. His leg twitched involuntarily. They want me to teach people how to accidentally win a war. They want to understand how you think. They won't like the answer, perhaps, but they're willing to listen. Zachary opened his eyes. What about you? I do not seek to emulate you. I didn't ask that. I want to know how you survive your own decisions. Zachary stared at the ceiling. We don't always, that's the part no one likes to hear. HRES didn't respond. He simply left the slate on the table and exited. Later that evening, Zachary sat alone outside the barracks, the wind calmer than usual. He watched the stars emerge between the clouds. The pain in his joints flared occasionally, a dull reminder of what he'd broken and what hadn't healed yet. A young Tarx technician approached cautiously, carrying a small container. I brought you something, she said. Zachary looked up. Is it edible? No, it's a filtration balm for your foot. He raised an eyebrow. You made this? I modified the base compound. It reduces microbial growth while accelerating dermal closure. Sounds fancy. It smells terrible. He accepted the container. That's promising. She hesitated. Are all humans like you? He gave her a long look. No, most are better. She left without another word. Zachary opened the container and sniffed the balm. It smelled like burnt kelp and old socks. He grinned despite himself and began applying it to his heel. Above him, the sky rumbled faintly. The war hadn't ended. Not really, but something had shifted. And somewhere in the archives of two alien civilizations, a human with a ruined boot and a dislocated shoulder had accidentally become a case study in the impossible. The air inside the Tarx recovery dome had a subtle antiseptic tang, something between vinegar and melted plastic. It clung to the skin and made Zachary's eyes itch, though he figured that could just as easily be from the recycled air filters that hummed and stuttered every few minutes like they were trying to cough something up. He sat shirtless on the edge of a padded platform, left arm bare, legs dangling, while a Tarx medical specialist hovered nearby, adjusting the settings on a portable scanner shaped like a flattened beetle. You've overcompensated with your right side. Is that a bad thing? It's inefficient. Your gait is imbalanced. You're stressing the lower lumbar joint and the hip socket. I can live with inefficient. I'm not trying to win a marathon. You're also grinding cartilage. That won't regenerate. You'll need surgical reinforcement eventually. Zachary scratched the back of his head. How long can I put that off? Until it fails. Then you'll be unable to walk. Sounds like something I'll worry about next month. The Tarx technician paused, mandibles twitching slightly. Your species tolerates degradation unusually well. It's not tolerance. It's stubbornness. Stubbornness is not typically a physiological trait. You'd be surprised. From the far side of the dome, Commander HRES entered without fanfare. A junior officer trailed behind, carrying a narrow case. Zachary didn't move. I'm not accepting a ceremonial dagger, he said. There is no dagger. Good, I wouldn't have anywhere to put it. HRES stepped closer. You've been cleared for limited movement outside the dome. No strain, no lifting. I'll do my best. No, you won't. That's why I'm assigning someone to monitor you, Zachary groaned. I don't need a babysitter. She's not a sitter. She's an observer. She will record your movements and reactions for comparative analysis. Sounds like a sitter with a clipboard. The observer arrived an hour later. Her name was Tura, a Tarx physiology specialist with a narrow skull and a habit of blinking one eye independently when thinking. She carried no visible weapons, but strapped to her side was a recorder the size of a lunchbox that emitted a faint clicking sound every few seconds. They walked slowly down the perimeter path outside the dome, Zachary favoring his right leg, shoulder bound tightly in a compression wrap. Tura adjusted the recorder's input frequency as they moved past a row of low storage units. "You altered your breathing pattern during incline. Did I?" "Yes." "You reduced inhalation depth by 12%, probably because I'm going uphill with half a spine. Your humor appears to mask discomfort. It masks a lot of things. Why do you continue to move without full recovery? Because if I stop, it'll be harder to start again." She paused, recording the response. "Is this typical for humans? I can't speak for all of us, but a lot of the ones I've met are bad at waiting around to feel better." Further down the path, a group of Tarx engineers was dismantling a temporary comms tower, folding the segmented legs inward like a dying insect. One of them, noticing Zachary, gave a short nod more out of curiosity than greeting. Zachary returned it without slowing. "Are you aware," Tura said, "that the Dreln have filed a formal inquiry with the Galactic Mediation Office regarding the legality of your incursion? I figured they'd be sore about it. They referenced unforeseeable biological irregularity as justification for reviewing the ceasefire terms. That's a fancy way of saying they didn't expect me to walk in and wreck the place. They expected kinetic confrontation. Not psychological destabilization via unarmed infiltration. Then they should have thought outside their own rulebook. Does your species train for such unpredictability? Not officially. Most of what we learn the hard way." They reached the edge of the observation field where scrubby plants clung to the red soil in defiance of the wind. Zachary lowered himself onto a flat stone, exhaling slowly. His shoulder ached fiercely now, a dull pressure that bloomed when he tried to straighten. Tura stood beside him, antennae adjusting to the wind. "I've reviewed the footage of your incursion," she said. "You used a Dreln soldier's own breath filter to incapacitate him. His helmet was loose. I improvised. You also rerouted a coolant bypass to flood the lower barracks. They left a maintenance panel open. 2 Tarx medical assistants fitted flexible pads along his spine and thigh, connecting them to a pulse unit that emitted a soft, rhythmic buzz. You will feel alternating tension, one of them said. Do not resist the contractions. I'll try not to scream, Zachary muttered. The current surged. His leg jerked involuntarily. He gritted his teeth. Your pain tolerance is elevated, the assistant noted, not by choice. You're not sedated, don't like being foggy. You could request a nerve block. I'd rather know which parts still work. The session lasted 26 minutes. By the end, sweat beaded on Zachary's forehead and his fingers trembled slightly as he sat up. He didn't speak until the assistants had deactivated the unit and removed the pads. How long until I can run again? That depends on how much you ignore our advice. Ignoring advice is half the reason I got here. The next morning, Tura rejoined him for a scheduled strength assessment in the courtyard behind the dome. It involved a series of balance exercises, weightless resistance bands, and a brutal isometric hold that left his shoulder visibly trembling. You're compensating with your abdominal wall, Tura said. Everyone's got a trick. You shouldn't be able to maintain this position with your injuries. I'm not doing it because I can, I'm doing it because I shouldn't, she tilted her head. That is not rational, it's not about rational. It's about refusing to be less than I was. You're aware that long-term damage is likely. Yeah, but if I can get through today, I'll deal with tomorrow when it gets here. Later that afternoon, HRES summoned both of them to the tactical wing, a modest prefab structure now half disassembled. Inside, several Tarx officers were debating the logistics of withdrawing from Varnok entirely. Atres didn't look up from the projection table. The Council has reviewed the ceasefire terms. They've upheld them. That's a relief, Zachary said. I was worried they'd ask me to do it all again. They've also requested a debrief in person. Not happening. My leg's still angry and I've got a standing appointment with an electrode. They've agreed to accept a recorded statement. Tura activated her recorder. Begin when ready. Zachary leaned forward. If anyone's still confused about why what I did worked, tell them this. I didn't walk into that outpost because I thought I'd win. I walked in because I was tired of watching people die while we all waited for someone to make a safe plan. He looked at Atres. That's not heroism, it's frustration. Tura recorded every word, then silently stepped out. Zachary stood slowly, favoring his right side again. So. That's it, Atres nodded. You are cleared to leave Varnok. A civilian shuttle departs in 2 days. Zachary exhaled. I'll need help packing. My bag's heavier than it used to be. You're not taking any weapons. I never had any to begin with. That night, under a pale sky rinsed clean by wind, Zachary sat alone outside the dome. The pain in his shoulder had dulled to a manageable throb. His leg felt anchored but mobile. He had regained exactly 80% of his pre-incursion range of motion. He would not regain the rest, he knew that, but he'd made his point. Inside, the recorder Tura left behind blinked quietly, storing every word, every breath, every irregular step, not as evidence, as reference. By the time the shuttle arrived, the Tarx had already dismantled most of the outer camp. Atres didn't attend the departure. He didn't need to. There was nothing more to explain.